Good evening, and today let's do a bit of a roundup of some of the most important and yet underreported stories happening across the whole country, starting with a new form of immigration crackdown. Specifically, I'm talking about the state of Florida announcing that they will be only offering driver's license tests in the English language, meaning that they are eliminating the option for people to be able to choose a foreign language when taking either a CDL or a normal driver's license test. And I personally had no idea that that was even an option, but apparently it was. Up until this month, you could have taken a driver's license test in Arabic, Chinese, Creole, Spanish, as well as Russian. I guess the thinking was that if you could identify the shape of a stop sign, you didn't really need to know what those words actually said. However, that whole setup is coming to an end. Following in the footsteps of the federal government, especially after some high-profile cases of CDL drivers who could not speak English causing deadly crashes on the road, the state of Florida is eliminating this non-English option. According to an announcement from the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, their equivalent of the DMV, starting on February 6th, English will be the only language option for both commercial as well as non-commercial driver's license tests. Here's specifically what the agency said in their announcement. Quote, beginning Friday, February 6th, all driver's license knowledge and skills examinations will be administered exclusively in English. This change applies to all driver's license classifications, including exams administered orally. Language translation services will no longer be permitted for knowledge or skills examinations, and any printed exams in languages other than English will be removed for use. Now, as I alluded to a moment ago, this change in Florida mirrors the change happening at the federal level. In March of last year, President Trump, he signed an executive order designating English as the official language of the United States. And then in the subsequent month, in April, he signed another executive order, this one directing the Secretary of Transportation to ensure that commercial truck drivers here in America, the ones who fail to meet English language proficiency standards, are immediately taken out of service. In that second order, here was what Trump wrote, quote, my administration will enforce the law to protect the safety of American truckers, drivers, passengers, and others, including by upholding the safety enforcement regulations that ensure that anyone behind the wheel of a commercial vehicle is properly qualified and proficient in our national language, English. This is common sense. Just for your reference, this order from President Trump, it actually had the effect of scrapping the rule that was in place ever since President Barack Obama. Under the Obama rule, if highway inspectors found a truck driver who couldn't speak English, that driver could be given a citation, but they were not allowed to remove that driver from service. They basically would just write them a ticket right there on the spot for not speaking English, and that was that. This lax Obama-era system, it led to things like this. Quote, in one Florida case, Indian national Harjinder Singh was accused of killing 3 people after making an illegal U-turn in a semi-truck. Officials said Singh, who was in the United States illegally, failed an English exam, answered only 2 of 12 questions correctly, and could identify just 1 of 4 road signs. Despite that, Washington State issued him a full-term commercial driver's license, a CDL license, in 2023, and California issued a second CDL license in 2024. Singh pleaded not guilty in September. Federal reviews have identified similar cases in California, New York, Pennsylvania, and other states. And so basically, starting in April of last year, they began testing drivers on the road. I've even heard, I've read anecdotal reports of federal authorities doing stop checks at way stations where they would literally take the truck drivers out of the truck and force them to read a Dr. Seuss book right there on the spot to prove that they could actually speak and read English. And this crackdown was effective. Between May and December of last year, 9,500 commercial truck drivers wound up getting booted from service because they failed one of these English tests. Quote, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said that more than 9,500 commercial truckers have been taken out of service for failing English language proficiency checks. Now, just to be fair, there are something like 2 million truck drivers in America, so 9,500 isn't that much. But on the flip side, 9,500 drivers who don't speak English operating a 20-ton truck on American highways is a lot. Also, on top these English-speaking drivers getting the boot, there is actually a parallel effort to catch illegal alien truck drivers. Quote, the language crackdown coincides with heightened immigration enforcement targeting commercial drivers who are in the country illegally. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said in October that 146 illegal immigrants operating semi-trucks were arrested during a joint ICE-Indiana State Police operation near the Illinois border. More than 40 drivers held CDLs issued by states including California, Illinois, and New York. And actually, to that last point regarding those several states that are issuing most of the CDLs, the Department of Transportation, they went on to announce possible penalties for these states if they continue to give these CDL licenses to illegal aliens. Quote, the Transportation Department has since threatened to withhold tens of millions of dollars in federal highway safety funds from California, Washington, and New Mexico unless they fully enforce English language rules and revoke improperly issued licenses. Unclear why Illinois and New York are not on this list, but there you have it. If you would like to read more about the current state of these CDLs, including the effort by the feds to enforce English language proficiency across the whole country and the parallel effort in Florida, I'll throw my research links. You can find them down in the description box below, which is that description box right below those like and subscribe buttons, both of which I hope you take a quick moment to smash so this video can be picked up by the YouTube algorithm and shared with ever more people. Thank you so much for that.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment, I'd like to introduce today's sponsor, Cowboy Colostrum. Look, it's the new year, and I know that many people, myself included, we're looking to finally fix some of those nagging problems in our lives. And so if you want to finally fix your gut, if you want to make your hair healthier and stronger, and if you want to add some fresh, natural glow to your skin in 2026, then you need to be adding colostrum to your daily routine. And Cowboy Colostrum, they offer the highest quality bovine colostrum that you can get here in the US. It's 100% American made from 100% American grass-fed cows. Now, if you've never heard of colostrum before, actually, I have mine here. This is the strawberry variety, and this is the chocolate, and I have the vanilla one kicking around here somewhere. It's great. Colostrum is basically, it's that very, very first milk that's made in the lead up to as well as right after the calf is born. And then within a few days, the milk, it actually transitioned into normal milk. But for those very few days, it's this super nutrient-dense and super antibody-dense colostrum. And unlike other brands, Cowboy Colostrum is true first-day whole colostrum rich in bioactives like immunoglobulins and growth factors. And it's not processed. It's not stripped down. It's really just the real thing. It's whole, full-fat, high-in-protein colostrum. And I will mention that if you're an animal lover like I am, you don't have to worry. They only collect the surplus colostrum from the mom after the baby calf had their fill. So check them out. Right now, they're offering a great deal to our viewers, 25% off your entire order. And so check them out. Just head on over to cowboycolostrum.com/Roman and use promo code Roman at checkouts to get 25% off. That's again, promo code Roman, ROMAN. And I'll also throw all their links. You can find them down in the description box below. Cowboy Colostrum supports the show, so let's support them right back. The links will be down in the description box below.
Moving along, though, to another story. 6 years after that autonomous zone was set up in Seattle, a jury has found that the city must pay over $30 million to the family of a teenager who was killed in that zone. Now, a little bit of background here in case you don't remember. In the year 2020, following the death of George Floyd, you had protests erupt in cities across the whole country. Now, most of them were actually normal protests, but as you likely remember, many of them spiraled out of control. Seattle was one of those places where it spiraled. During what the mayor of Seattle at the time dubbed the Summer of Love, you had left-wing protesters force the Seattle police to literally abandon their East Precinct building, and then those protesters, they took over 8 square blocks of Capitol Hill. And for 3 full weeks, these protesters, they set up an autonomous zone within the city. They first called it CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, but then later it got renamed to CHOP, C-H-O-P, the Capitol Hill Occupy Protest. And in short, it was basically a no-go zone. It was an anarchist-style enclave where police and paramedics could not enter. They literally had checkpoints set up with armed security guards of their own. And the city government at the time, they essentially let it happen. After the police were chased out of their own precinct building for 3 full weeks, the city government offered tacit support to the protesters, refusing to send in the police to restore order. And it was only after a 16-year-old boy was killed in this CHOP zone that the then mayor of Seattle, Ms. Jenny Durkin, issued an executive order declaring that the protest was an illegal assembly. And by the next morning, the police were able to re-enter the zone, clear out the encampments, and they wound up arresting more than 40 people who failed to disperse. Meaning, looking back on it in a very practical sense, that the reason that this autonomous zone was able to last for 3 full weeks was because the mayor refused to do anything about it. The moment that she signed an executive order, it was basically gone within 24 hours. Now, the teenager who was killed, let me briefly tell you his story. Quote, 16-year-old Antonio Mays Jr. lived with his family in Southern California. Mays had traveled to Seattle to join the protest after leaving a note for his father explaining he had left their home to join in the civil rights movement. He did not tell his father where he was going, only that he wanted to make him proud. Less than 10 days later, Mays was dead after being fatally shot in a stolen white Jeep that crashed into chopped barricades just outside of the abandoned East Precinct. After he was shot alongside 14-year-old Robert West, who survived, volunteer protest medics attempted to treat the boy's wounds. Witnesses called 911, but because first responders wouldn't come to the zone, they decided to transport the boys via private vehicles. And just for your general reference, the police, they failed to respond for 5 full hours due to the limits they had on being able to enter this chop zone. And unfortunately, Antonio Mays Jr. did not survive his wounds. And as I mentioned earlier, after his death, the mayor issued her executive order and the autonomous zone was cleared away by the next morning. However, and this next part was so surprising to me, I actually had to triple check that it was true in making this episode, and it is true. The city never arrested nor charged anyone with the murder, despite there being witnesses who said that Antonio was shot by one of those armed chopped security guards. Nobody was held criminally liable. And so really take the whole situation in for a moment. The city government allowed what can rightfully be called an actual insurrection to take place. They allowed left-wing protesters to literally chase the police away from their building, take up 8 square blocks of the city, set up their own administration, set up their own armed security checkpoints. Cops and paramedics were not allowed inside. And then, after a teenager was killed in the zone, the city never arrested or charged anyone. And so, given all that, in 2023, 3 years later, the boy's father filed a lawsuit against the city, basically trying to hold them accountable. Quote, Mays Sr.'s lawsuit, filed in 2023, originally sought to hold the city accountable for allowing CHOP to form and persist for 3 weeks, taking aim at former Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin, former police chief Carmen Best, and other officials. However, before the case got to trial, the judge threw out those arguments and removed those defendants, narrowing the case to a question of whether the city failed in its emergency response. And indeed, with that much more narrow question being asked, the case was allowed to move forward. And after 3 years in the legal system, it finally got to a jury. And after deliberating for 12 days, the jury found that the city of Seattle was indeed negligent in their emergency response and must therefore pay $30 million in damages to the family. Quote, the jury awarded about $4 million to the estate of Antonio Mays Jr. and about $26 million to Antonio Mays Sr., the teen's father. Jurors answered yes to 2 questions the court posed: whether the city was negligent in its response to the shooting, and if so, whether the negligence caused Antonio Mays Jr.'s death. The city of Seattle will have to pay Antonio Mays Sr. more than $30.5 million in damages. And for his part, Mr. Antonio Sr. said that this was a bittersweet victory. Here was what he was quoted as saying by the Seattle Times following the verdict. Quote, Antonio Mays Sr. said that the verdict represents some justice, but he continues to live with the loss of his son and unanswered questions around his death. I can't say that it feels good, he said at a news conference following the decision. I can't say that it feels complete because it doesn't. I'm thankful for the verdict, I'm thankful for the success, but it doesn't feel like a resolve. The words of a father who has lost a son. If you'd like to read the specific details of this case, I'll throw the links to the court documents. You'll be able to find them down in that description box below. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment, I'd like to introduce today's sponsor, Shenyun Performing Arts. It is the preeminent best Chinese classical dance performance in the world, but funny enough, they're actually based right here in the US, and they're not allowed to perform in China. Part of the show, it exposes the crimes of the Chinese Communist Party, and so ironically, they can't even go there. But the show itself is great. I've personally seen it several times, and the athleticism, the artistry, the stories are phenomenal. Some of them are touching, some are funny, a lot of them are thought-provoking. And you're not really allowed to film the show, but basically it looked exactly like the commercials do. Beautiful colors, a full orchestra right there in the theater. They also have the screen in the back that's perfectly timed with the dancers. So sometimes it looks like they're jumping in and out of the screen to tell the story, which is cool. But the best part is that it's just super uplifting in a moral sense. I feel like every time I watch it, I leave the theater as a better person than I did coming in. And most shows nowadays, at least in my opinion, are really subversive and they sneak in some communist elements. But Shen Yun is different. They really showcase traditional culture. And even though it's Chinese, it actually probably resonates with everyone. So check it out. They have shows coming up in like 100 different cities: Dallas, Houston, New York, Memphis, Charlotte, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Seattle, pretty much everywhere else in between. And the best part is that to our viewers, they're offering a special promotional deal. Just buy your tickets over on the Shen Yun website and use promo code ROMAN26 to avoid paying both the ticketing fee as well as the facility fee. That's again promo code ROMAN26. I'll throw a link to the website where you can find all the different show dates and cities. It'll be down in the description box below. Moving along though, in another case of basically reaping what you sow, Mr. Ryan Ruth, the second attempted Trump assassin, he was recently sentenced to life behind bars. Or in other words, he was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Now, given the fact that the book has pretty much been closed on Mr. Ruth, and we probably will not do any more coverage of him moving forward, I wanted to pull out 4 interesting tidbits regarding his case that came out in trial. The first, and this was something that I didn't really catch at the time, was that he was apparently ready to flee the country on the same day that he was perched up at the golf course. Quote, investigators searching Ruth's vehicle recovered multiple cell phones, a list of international flights scheduled for the afternoon and evening of the attack, and directions to Miami International Airport. Which was interesting because if you remember, after he was discovered at the golf course, he got into his car, fled the scene, drove away, and he was only arrested later on the highway. Perhaps if he wasn't arrested, he might have actually been able to slip away out of the country. Now, secondly, during the trial, Mr. Ruth, he introduced a medical report claiming that he had mental issues and should not be able to stand trial. Quote, Dr. Heather Holmes wrote a report for the defense, which is unavailable to the public, that Ruth suffers from narcissistic personality disorder and bipolar II. However, prosecutors argue that these diagnoses do not provide a basis to claim incompetence, insanity, or diminished capacity. Additionally, the disorders are not corroborated by the defendant's prior medical or psychiatric records. There was also a separate psychiatric evaluation that concluded that Mr. Ryan Ruth was competent enough to stand trial. Thirdly, back in October, when he was found guilty on all 5 counts, Mr. Ryan Ruth, he, in court, grabbed a pen and tried to stab himself in the neck with it. He was unsuccessful, though, given the fact that U.S. Marshals restrained him right then and there. That's nothing else to say there. That was just interesting. However, despite that, during the trial, Mr. Ruth attempted to portray himself as being both a gentle as well as a nonviolent soul. Quote, during the trial, Ruth attempted to portray himself as gentle and nonviolent, a characterization prosecutors sharply disputed, arguing that his planning showed clear intent to kill Trump. The prosecution argued in a memo that Ruth, for all his protestations of peacefulness, is a dangerous man, at least when it comes to individuals who stand in his way. Which, just as an aside to me, really shows how people view public figures. They can think of themselves as being gentle and peaceful and you wouldn't hurt a fly, but you're willing to kill a public figure because you don't think of them as a human being, you just think of them as an idea. Also, undercutting the portrayal of him being a gentle and nonviolent soul was a witness testimony that the prosecution introduced at trial. Quote, during the trial, a witness testified that he contacted law enforcement after Ruth dropped off a box at his home in April following a visit to the area near the golf course. Inside the box was a handwritten letter from Ruth that read, in part, Dear World, this was the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, but I am so sorry I failed you. I tried my best and gave it all the gumption I could muster. It is up to you now to finish the job. That same note, by the way, it went on to offer $150,000 to anyone who could finish the job. And so in its totality, the whole thing was pretty much an open and shut case. The prosecutors argued that a life sentence in this case was appropriate given the months of deliberate planning that went into it, the clear intention to kill, the lack of remorse or regret after the fact, as well as basically the necessity for this case to send a clear message to any other would-be assassins. And indeed, Judge Eileen Cannon, she agreed with the prosecution and she sentenced Mr. Ryan Ruth to life in prison for attempting to assassinate President Trump. She also gave him 7 years for the gun charge, and she ordered him to pay a $500 fine. It's unclear what'll happen if he doesn't pay that fine. Regardless, that's the end of Mr. Ryan Ruth's story, at least for now. You never know what'll happen in the future. If you'd like to read more about his case, I will throw some resources, including the court documents. You'll be able to find them down in the description box below. That same description box right below those like and subscribe buttons, which I'm sure you've already smashed, but if you haven't, now's another opportunity for you to do so. And then lastly, on a totally unrelated topic, I mentioned in the last episode as well, we here at the Epoch Times, we recently published a mini documentary on the life of Charlie Kirk. In my opinion, it's a good documentary. It serves as both a memorial to him, as well as sort of a textbook study of how the extremist label was slapped on him, grew by the media, by social media, and then spiraled out of control into a monster that took on a life of its own and wound up in the mind of some deranged individual who pulled the trigger and killed Charlie Kirk in front of the whole world. It's a good documentary. It traces his life. It traces his impact on the world as well as America, and also the world. And then it traces the extremist label and how the label on Kirk, but also by examining the label on Kirk, it traces how the labels in general are used to attack people who go against the official narrative. It's a good documentary. Hope you check it out. I'll throw a link to it. It'll be there at the top of the description box below. You can just click on it, check it out. You also, by the way, with the documentary access, you'll get a subscription to the Epoch Times. So you get kind of a whole bundle. You can check out all the other documentaries we have on there, the shows, the infographics, the articles, everything on there. Plus, you get the Charlie Kirk documentary. So check it out. The link will be right there at the top of the description box below. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.